In the past few years, the word Latinx has become more popular, but there's a lot of strong opinions about this word.
Too many cultures have used the masculine to refer to all people. That's messed up, which is why the right word is Latinx.
Look, you can't just make up a word and force people to use it.
I'm a proud Latinx. What the hell is a Latinx? Is it a Cuban Kleenex? If so, then it is the best Kleenex.
Maybe you've heard this debate among friends and family, or seen it talked about all over social media. Words like this, meant to represent a huge, diverse population of people, always have a big job to do. And there are many words that people use to define themselves, based on ethnic background or cultural heritage.
So, for example, I might call myself Chicana at certain points and then call myself Latina and then use Latinx, right? We create preferences and we still understand each other.
This is Cristina Mora. She's a professor of sociology at UC Berkeley, and her research is focused on how categories like Latino, Hispanic, and Latinx emerged in places like the United States. So where did the term Latinx come from? And should we use it to describe such a large group of people?
When I was born, on my birth certificate, there was only two options to describe what I was. I was either Afro-American or Caucasian. Now, clearly I wasn't Afro-American, so I was white by default.
In the 1960s, if you just looked at Census Bureau reports, you'd probably not know that there was a pretty significant and sizable and growing Latinx community.
That's because back then, there weren't a lot of categories on the census. It was like the government didn't see these communities. This was a problem for organizers across the country. Communities in the Southwest that were Mexican American were pushing for issues like bilingual job training and equal access to education, much like Puerto Rican and Cuban communities on the East Coast. But politicians like Lyndon Johnson said these were regional issues, not the job of an administration focused on national constituencies. These communities were seen as existing in their own bubbles, despite having to fight similar battles against discrimination and for more rights and resources. So organizers decided to unite to create a national identity. But finding a name that would communicate a shared cultural identity and help in this fight for recognition in the United States was not easy. One of the first terms proposed was brown, because the census already thought in terms of black and white, quite literally. But other ethnic and racial groups, like Southeast Asian and Filipino communities, might use this term too. Latin American was another idea, but for many, this sounded too foreign.
An important part of this struggle was to sort of argue that Latinos belonged here, that Latinos were part and parcel of US history. And so many feared that Latin American would refer to an outsider, a permanent sort of foreign status, and not inherently American.
The term La Raza, meaning the people or the race, was in wide use. But conservative Latinos worried it would be seen as too radical and too specific to political movements in Mexico. So in the end, the Nixon administration settled on an imperfect solution: Hispanic, meaning someone having an historic or cultural link to Spain. But then, in the 1990s, the connection to Spain was being re-examined. After all, many of these communities didn't really think of themselves as European or Spanish.
As sort of Latino was being sort of much more used in vogue, that we are connected to each other by our history of being colonized versus our connection to Spain, which is what Hispanic tends to sort of conjure up in politics and in history.
However, Latino and Latina are different from something like African American or Italian American. They're not gender neutral. So today, a new word has emerged.
Latinx comes with a new generation that is thinking about gender politics in ways that question whether we should have a binary, in ways that see this as being in solidarity with transgender or with non-binary populations.
So everyone who doesn't identify as male feels included. Come on, you can say it.
You know, the X was important. The X was meant to be noticed, to make you pause, to really think about intersectional politics and intersectional identities.
Is it even proper Spanish or English? I bet you can't even tell me a word that ends in NX.
Jinx, links, minx.
However, Spanish speakers might still find that the X doesn't work for them. It's not an easy letter to say in Spanish. Spanish usually uses an A for female or O for male at the end of words, but some Spanish speakers are starting to use an E at the ends of words to make them more gender neutral. So a term like Latine escapes the binary of Latino or Latina.
On the one hand, some argue it's just a way of being able to say a non-binary form in Spanish, but others have argued that it is a way of creating these transnational solidarity movements with much more progressive gender politics in Latin America that tend to use Latina and not Latinx.
Okay, so this is a lot of words and terms. Whether you're part of the community or not, people may ask, what's the correct word to use? And the reality is, there isn't just one word. Gallup recently asked Hispanic adults what they prefer, and 57% said it really doesn't matter.
I think it is nuts to think that they would always and forever hold true to just one category that would last the test of time. I think this is just a reflection of the dynamism that continues to happen and the ways that groups come to see themselves as their sort of social political environment evolves.
While there might be a different experience within each region, having a unified national identity makes everyone more visible.
There is something called, for example, a Latino COVID death crisis. It is actually happening.
Latinx people are more likely to be essential workers on the front lines. Members from the community died at a much younger age from COVID-19.
It is happening in Mexican American communities, it's happening in Central American communities now. That's incredibly important to acknowledge, and that we acknowledge only when we can see data patterns that disaggregate these communities from whites.
These communities can point to clear data and ask for things like better job protections and better access to health services. So while it's very important to have a conversation about what words to use, we need to be acting in more meaningful ways too. The point is that this is connected to a much larger conversation about culture, about creating a shared sense of belonging, and being visible as a community. So what do you think? Do you use the term Latinx? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos on surprising research, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Figure 1. We also have more stories on our website, like how a psychology experiment in the 1940s helped spark the gay rights movement. You can check it out at universityofcalifornia.edu/fig1.